Hello, Adam's child. Welcome to this sermon where we examine and discuss one of the largest and most fierce factions in post-war America, Caesar's Legion. From its inception to its society, economy, and potential future, the Legion is a fascinating group, so crank up the rads while we get Roman up in here. The Wasteland is a harsh and unforgiving place no matter what corner of it you find yourself in. But few places were as savagely war-torn and lawless as post-war Arizona. In the years that followed after the bombs fell, society broke down and survivors gave in to tribalistic practices. 200 years after Adam blessed the earth with his holy fire, the deserts of Arizona are awash in warring tribes, with a few larger settlements fighting for their existence, scarcely able to trade with one another without risking raids and the loss of their material and men. This lawless and barbaric landscape became the focus of a humanitarian group from California and a small group of men. The Followers of the Apocalypse were formed after the devastation of the Great War, united in the mission to help humanity grapple with and overcome the suffering and ruin brought on by man's hubris. To this end, they preserve knowledge, educate all those with the time and capacity to learn, create and distribute medical aid, amongst a number of other charitable endeavors. A knowledge-gathering expedition was greenlit with at least 3 known members participating. Edward Sallow, a follower that specialized in anthropology and linguistics, Bill Calhoun, who was trained as a physician, and Joshua Graham, a Mormon missionary who had special expertise in tribal dialects of the Grand Canyon area. They would set off on their expedition with the goal of learning local tribal dialects, which would further the followers' plans to expand their ability to disseminate knowledge and care. This goal would not be fully realized, or at least not in the way that any of them intended. 2 key events unfolded and turned this expedition from 3 well-meaning men looking to learn the local dialects into something no one could have expected. The first was the discovery of some pre-war literature, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which is a large 6-volume but outdated treatise of the history of the Roman Empire, as well as Commentary, a series of notes and personal writings published for propagandistic purposes by none other than Julius Caesar himself. Edward would take keen interest in these books, reading them voraciously and fixating on Julius Caesar, the man who reshaped the Roman Empire. The second inflection point for this group was their unexpected capture by a tribe called the Blackfoots, who, although initially friendly, became hostile after Joshua may have made a translation error. The Blackfoots were on their back foot because they were warring with a number of other tribes, but were pathetically inept in the ways of fighting, tactics, and strategy. No one but Edward knows the precise reason he offered the Blackfoot tribe instruction and knowledge in small unit tactics, weapon maintenance, and use of explosives. By drawing on the cache of knowledge that he had accumulated through time as a follower, and particularly from his recent acquired knowledge of the ancient Roman Empire, Edward told his fellow captives that this was necessary for their own survival. If their captors, the Blackfoots, were too weak to stand up to their enemies, that meant doom for them as their prisoners. The gambit was risky, but it seemed like they had nothing else to lose, and Edward got to put his recently acquired knowledge to the test, which may have been his real intent all along. The Blackfoot were surprisingly successful, and believing Edward to be almost like a sorcerer, they began to follow his orders: divide et impera, divide and conquer. Their first major engagement was meant to make a statement. They targeted their weakest foe, a group called the Ridgers, who upon refusing to surrender were completely slaughtered, man, woman, and child. Wiped off the face of the wasteland, Edward introduced a whole new way of fighting that he called total war. The Kaibab tribe was next, and when they also refused, Edward showed one of their envoys the piled up remains of the Ridgers, which shocked the tribe into surrendering. And it was upon this foundation of annihilation that Edward began to lead and build an army. As each of the Blackfoot's enemies surrendered, they were forcefully assimilated, growing Edward's army, but there was one great enemy to be conquered. It was not another tribe or an opposing leader. It was an ideology, and it was tribalism. For these former enemy tribes to work together, they would need to be stripped of their tribal identity and have it replaced with one shared monolithic culture. It was at this moment that Edward, inspired by his readings of the Roman Empire, introduced the Roman dress, culture, religion, and language as a replacement for their tribal trappings. In 2247, he officially declared his new tribal army his legion, adopted the symbol of the bull, which was the symbol of Julius Caesar's favorite legion, and crowned himself as Caesar. His former companions, whom he had traveled with on a noble pursuit to learn tribal languages and dialects, had two very different fates. Calhoun the physician was sent west back to civilized lands to spread a simple message. Edward, or should I say Caesar, now that he has abandoned his former name and identity, is not to be interfered with. Such a message from a former follower of the apocalypse who was able to wrangle a handful of tribes in the lawless deserts of Arizona likely did not concern some of the larger factions, like the New California Republic, who were busy looking for ways to expand their republic east towards the Mojave. But this was certainly a mistake. Joshua Graham, the Mormon missionary companion meant to help teach and interpret local tribal dialects, stayed with Caesar first and foremost as a translator, allowing Caesar to effectively manage and give orders to his growing army. In-depth details about the legion's major years of expansion between 2248 and 2281, which is the year that New Vegas takes place, are few and generally undetailed, but Caesar and his army were an unstoppable force, taking over much of the desert area known in the pre-war as Arizona. Expanding into New Mexico, Utah, and even Colorado, the legion subsumed over 80 major tribal groups, stripping them of their former identity and brutally integrating and training them to be obedient, mindless killing machines. During these years, Joshua Graham went from simply translating Caesar's orders to having the authority to give orders directly and ultimately to leading legionaries into battle. He was given the high title of legate, second in power and influence only to Caesar himself, adopting a Latin name known to the legion as the Malpais legate. Caesar would, in a ceremonial fashion, declare himself the son of Mars, evoking the mythical story of the founding of the city of Rome by Romulus and Remus, both of whom were twin sons of the god of Mars, further entrenching himself in Roman and, by extension, legion mythos. In 2055, Caesar would establish his capital in the ruins of Flagstaff, Arizona, a physical monument to his army and their unmatched abilities on the battlefield. Caesar had instituted the golden bull as the symbol of his legion, standing out on a red background, and as their fame grew, they would often be referred to by this symbol, the bull. Caesar single-handedly brought order and stability to a region that had been languishing under the chaos of tribal warfare and disunity. The settlements that could barely even venture out to trade with one another suddenly found themselves able to safely travel and trade anywhere within Caesar's domain, and the people were able to be more productive than ever before. There was only one thing that settler or legionary alike had to acknowledge: Caesar's complete and total supremacy. By the year 2281, Caesar's might encompassed all of Arizona and New Mexico and much of Utah and parts of Colorado as well. Caesar, however, was not satisfied with merely taming the dozens, hundreds of infighting tribes that populated the wastes of the western deserts. He had his eyes on an even larger prize, a vision more grand than ever before that he termed Pax Romana, where the legion's influence would stretch all the way to the coastline, with the grand prize being the utter subjugation of the New California Republic, and the shining city of New Vegas would serve as his Rome. For all the land that the Legion controlled, none of their cities or settlements could even compare to the splendor of New Vegas, and so the Legion marshaled its forces to cross the mighty Colorado River and break the tired NCR forces at Hoover Dam, before sweeping in and claiming New Vegas. Caesar saw the NCR as weak and fettered by fatal pre-war practices and beliefs that only weighed them down and made them unsuited for a post-apocalyptic world. Using the great civilian machine the NCR had built up over decades, something Caesar notably lacked, he would finally have his perfect empire. In 2277, Caesar and his military leader, the Malpais Legate, after having built up their forces on the east side of the Colorado River near the Hoover Dam, gave the final orders to execute the first step in a chain reaction that would hopefully see Caesar ruling from Vegas, chasing the NCR west towards their homelands, licking their wounds. Fighting broke out, and the NCR were on their back foot, facing down a large, well-trained, and incredibly motivated mass of indoctrinated killers. General Lee Oliver, the leader of the NCR army, ordered his soldiers to fall back to the middle of the dam, and under the leadership of the Malpais Legate, Legion forces flooded onto it. The narrow confines of the dam meant the fighting was slow and difficult, and the Legion became a great target for NCR Rangers, elite soldiers that are particularly adept at long-range engagements. Rangers targeted Legion officers, and upon realizing the devastating effect the Rangers were having, the Legate ordered the veterans in the rear to push up past the less experienced Legion fighters on the front line in order to rush the ridge where the Rangers were. Mass chaos ensued, and when NCR troops pulled to the sides to let the veteran legionaries chase the sharpshooters, the Rangers took the time to retreat to a small city west of the dam. In hot pursuit, the Legion forces descended on Boulder City, but by the time they reached the buildings, the Rangers had already come and gone, and they had wired the city to explode. The ensuing explosions were devastating to the Legion forces, and the consequent chaos left them vulnerable to NCR attacks. Understanding the hopelessness of the situation, the Malpais Legate ordered a full retreat, knowing that this was the Legion's first large-scale defeat ever. Caesar was enraged at this. He lit his legate on fire and threw him down the Grand Canyon as punishment and an example to all, and started to prepare his legion for a second attempt to take the Hoover Dam from the NCR and everything else west of the Colorado. With a new and imposing legate commanding his forces, for 4 years Caesar gathered and prepared his mighty legion to face the NCR once again, while his new legate went on a campaign in Utah where he subjugated 14 tribes and eradicated 5 more from the face of the earth. With renewed strength, Caesar quickly took the east side of the Colorado once again in 2281 and began building their war camp just east of the dam. After the Legion's first humiliating defeat at Hoover, Caesar's approach is much more cautious, and he has discovered a mysterious bunker nearby, the entrance bearing the sigil of the Lucky 38, Mr. House's mysterious casino, and he wants to crack it open and learn its secrets. A weakening of the NCR, and Robert House, the proprietor of the New Vegas Strip, is one of the goals before an all-out attack on Hoover Dam. To that end, Caesar and his secretive force of Frumentari are engaged in a number of alliances with smaller groups like the Great Khans, the Boomers, the Omertas, and the White Glove Society, as well as assassination plans for Robert House and the president of the NCR, Aaron Kimball. There is, however, one large hurdle to overcome that he couldn't plan for and that no one in the Legion can solve. There is something wrong with Caesar. It started slowly. He became more reclusive. His normally healthy demeanor took a turn. By the time crippling headaches started to manifest, it was clear to those closest to him that something was deeply wrong with Caesar, although he would not stand for any talk or speculation about his health. Caesar suspects that he has a brain tumor as the headaches continue to worsen until they were debilitating and his left leg had become stiff, making it impossible to walk normally. Caesar's tumor will need to be dealt with prior to the second battle so that not only can Caesar be well enough to lead his legion in such an important moment, but also because there would undoubtedly be a succession crisis, possibly resulting in a fracturing of his empire. Of course, not Caesar, but the Courier, the player character of Fallout New Vegas, will do more to determine the fate of not only Caesar himself, but whether or not they are victorious in their ultimate goal. The ideology of the Legion stands out amongst a diverse range espoused by other known groups in the Wasteland, but like many factions that have a strong central leader and creator, the ideologies of the faction is just an extension of their leader. The Legion was crafted in nearly its entirety by the man that was once Edward Sallow. The entire purpose of the Legion was laid out quite clearly by Caesar. He can be accused of many things, but being indirect is generally not one of them. In no unclear terms, Caesar states that the Legion represents something that no one else has achieved: stability at all costs. This one goal is the guiding principle behind the brutality of the Legion, their uncompromising stance in battle, their complete adherence and loyalty to Caesar, and their punishingly strict enforcement of strict rules and codes of conduct. Much can be said about the Legion's brutal methods and the destruction wrought through warfare and cultural destruction and assimilation, but one thing is undeniable: even the entire Roman inspiration is just a means to an end, not the actual goal. Legion lands are stable and may be the safest part of America's wasteland to exist, and therefore Caesar has and continues to succeed at his goal of ultimate stability. This stability, though, cannot be achieved through care for the individual or an acknowledgement of civil liberties. Therefore, the good of the Legion comes before all else. Individualism and civil rights or liberties are anathema to the Legion, since they would prioritize a person, any person, above the state, which has absolute authority and control. The individual's ultimate purpose is to be used by the state either as a fighter for the Legion or in industry to support the unceasing war effort. By Caesar's own admission, the Legion is nationalist, imperialist, totalitarian, and as a homogeneous culture due to the common practice of completely obliterating any vestige of tribal culture. This means that the Legion is in direct opposition to systems that elevate the individual, divest any and all power from a single person, and concentrate it at the top in a single leader. The NCR is that perfect ideological opposite, and therefore it became the natural target for Caesar. The NCR tried to emulate the political systems of the pre-war United States. Representative democracy, human rights, and protection of personal property stand in contrast to the Legion. Although the NCR has its own expansionist and imperialist ambitions, but Caesar is disgusted by what he sees as the same weaknesses that brought about the Great War in the first place. Greed and corruption runs end to end, top to bottom in the NCR, where politicians grease their pockets with bribes from the most wealthy NCR citizens, landowners, Brahmin barons, and wealthy businessmen, which often stand in opposition to the will of the people. Unlike the Legion, the NCR lacks an intense focus on the greater good, since most individuals are just looking out for themselves, and Caesar sees this as a fatal weakness that will bring about the fall of the NCR, just as it did the pre-war governments. Therefore, the NCR is considered the opposite of the Legion, where the NCR lacks a greater good, is subject to corruption, and is built on a foundation of failed pre-war governments. To this end, it is the Legion's destiny to overcome its ideological opposite and subsume it, turning it from an inefficient bureaucratic mess into a tightly controlled military dictatorship. Caesar can't help himself but to put their opposition and war in terms of Roman history. The Roman Empire had been transformed after Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and assumed control. Likewise, Fallout Caesar will cross the Colorado, take New Vegas as his Rome, and defeat the NCR. The Legion will transform from a nomadic army to a standing army that will protect its dictator and the citizens of this newly transformed republic. Caesar is an absolute ruler. His word is law, as he has declared himself the son of Mars, and to disobey is to deny the undeniable divine truth. Even in instances of apparent hypocrisy, Caesar cannot be questioned, and even acknowledging apparent weaknesses could be a fatal mistake. Let there be no mistake what kind of ruler and leader Caesar is. He is an absolute dictator. Despite the confidence in his Legion and his personal elite guards, he will demand all outsiders at the fort to completely disarm, and absolutely no extra people are allowed inside his tent, so any companions will have to wait outside. Such is Caesar's paranoia. The Legion's laws and practices are a natural consequence of their internal ideology, i.e., the support of the collective and stability over all else. Personal sacrifice is the cornerstone of this ideology because if one is not willing to give every ounce of themselves to the cause, then the system no longer works. As a result, it's seen as a weakness to rely on robots. Human warriors believe in a cause, while robots just follow programming. Caesar does not believe that the answer to the post-war era is technology, but trusting in weapons forged from blood and flesh. This has an effect on the weapons that the Legion uses in battle. Recruits and lower-ranking legionaries are often given basic weapons, sometimes as simple as spears and machetes. Those that are brave and skilled enough to face their enemies with such primitive weapons and survive have a greater chance of climbing the ranks and gaining access to better weaponry, further enhancing their lethality. It is not a great surprise then that chem use among the Legion is strictly forbidden, even, rather controversially, the use of stim packs to save lives. While the Legion's hard stance against addictive chems is understandable, disallowing life-saving medicine is less so. The only real justification being that only the strongest survive while the weak are crushed in the cogs of the machine. This distrust or disaffection of technology doesn't only apply to the military though, it impacts civilian life as well. Due to the strict ban on chems, even life-saving ones, child and maternal mortality is higher within the Legion than outside of it. Any chemical aids must be herbal remedies, pastes and powders that are created from the plants and other natural things that can be found in nature, but this isn't enough. Caesar wishes to swell his numbers and incentivizes the bearing of children, but this seems to work against that goal. What makes the stance even more problematic is that Caesar has stowed away in his tent at the fort an autodoc, an advanced piece of pre-war medical technology that has the ability to diagnose and treat a wide array of ailments. Caesar is of course suffering the effects of a brain tumor and has used the autodoc to try and treat it himself, as to not lose face amongst his army, but even more, he will allow in certain circumstances the use of the autodoc by others as a sort of gift. It is really important to note that exceptions to the state's laws, rules, or ideology are quite common, which would seem to stand in contradiction to the Legion's declaration that it is the faction of morals and virtues. Perhaps it can be explained away by justifying any contradiction as serving the greater good of stability in the wasteland, but hypocrisy is hypocrisy. Early on during the Legion's aggressive expansion in Arizona, he had promised a tribe known as the Twisted Hares to not assimilate them like the other tribes, if they offered their exceptional scouting abilities for his cause. The Twisted Hares agreed and were a valuable asset for Caesar as he conquered tribes, and it was even the Twisted Hares, namely one specific member, Ulysses, that first found the Hoover Dam. As a show of thanks, Caesar went back on his word and began to forcefully assimilate the tribe just like everyone before. But when the Twisted Hares resisted, many were strung up and crucified along the road. Additionally, the Great Khans are a local raider group with a seething hatred for the NCR, so much so that it is blinding them into accepting a deal to join the Legion in the fight against their sworn enemy. A frumentarius named Carl has been meeting the leaders of the Great Khans and telling them a bevy of lies. The Khans don't know the Legion's extremely strict stance on chems, which is currently the lifeblood of the group, nor did their female members know that women are forbidden from fighting and they would simply become property of legionaries with the sole purpose of having children. Lastly, their understanding of the brutal assimilation practices of the Legion is fuzzy because Carl tells the Khans whatever they need to hear in order to join, even if that means constant, protracted lies. Even Caesar's own soldiers can be found with Hydra, a home-brewed chem that can be used to cure crippled limbs but carries a relatively low addiction chance. Just because it isn't a pre-war chem means that it takes advantage of some weird loophole, I guess. The autodoc isn't the only advanced tech that Caesar uses. He sports an extremely rare and highly advanced weapon called the Displacer Glove, which is the single most advanced weapon that we see in the entire Legion. Just as the laws and practices of the Legion naturally follow from their ideology, their society follows from said rules and laws, although there is no small amount of personal injection of Caesar's preferences. As has been stated, there is no such thing as freedoms, rights, or personal liberties. In fact, there isn't really even a concept of citizenry. Legionaries are fighters for Caesar, unlike in the Roman Empire, where veterans would be rewarded with land and would at one point retire from service. Caesar's legionaries are given no such comforts or rewards. They are to bring Caesar's vision of stability in a fractured post-war world until they are met with death. The lack of formal citizenship makes things a little strange with all the settlements and cities within Legion control. They are not citizens of the Empire, as that would afford them rights. They simply exist within their settlements and generally will not run into much trouble unless they refuse the commands of a legionary or run afoul of the strict laws. Although there are essentially those that fight and those that supply the fight, there is technically a lower caste of people within the Legion: slaves. The Legion actually divides their enslaved into two groups: captures and slaves. Captures are non-tribal people that are caught by the Legion, many of which are NCR citizens in Fallout New Vegas. Captures are assessed for overall fitness and well-being by a slave master before they are sent on to have the possibility of becoming a slave. Those that do not pass the initial screenings are killed on the spot. In a rather atypical manner, there is some structure and bureaucracy regarding the management of slaves, as they can be bought and sold within the Empire. The Consul Officiorum ab Famulatus is the title of the one who oversees the drafting of legal documents regarding the slave market, like bills of sale. Slaves can be of any age and are given tasks and duties to perform while upholding the so-called slave virtues: honesty, industry, and prudence, as they fulfill the tasks of their master, which can be anything from menial labor to sex. The Legion will bargain with people and pay for slaves, as happened with a woman named Carla Boone, who was an NCR citizen and wife of an NCR sharpshooter. Interestingly, the Legion appears to have clauses that if a pregnant slave gives birth to viable offspring, the seller can receive another lump sum. Slaves have no prospect or hope for freedom, as they are considered slaves for life and are not allowed any possessions, no matter how small or inconsequential, like forbidding a young slave girl her one and only dear possession, a stuffed teddy bear. They also typically wear simple clothing, no shoes, and are marked with a large red X on their torso. And although they are not seen in great quantity in Fallout New Vegas, they can sometimes be seen limping to and from the fort with large loads on their backs, and are generally apprehensive to engage anyone in dialogue. In some cases, the Legion will use slave collars for some problematic slaves, which is an interesting reliance on technology that we don't typically see them use. Since the Legion considers all those outside of its number and the areas they control as outsiders, they often see enslavement of outsiders as instilling virtue and higher purpose to people who live vapid, pointless lives and consider enslavement a favor. Prisoners of war are treated worse than slaves, as they have no utility for the Legion. They are often kept in order to be brutally killed or crucified as a form of psychological warfare, like against the NCR. Prisoners that are not summarily executed or hoisted onto crosses to die slowly in the blistering Mojave sun will be forced to provide legionaries with entertainment by fighting to the death inside an arena. The Legion breeds vicious dogs that they use to fight in wars or as guards, but also to fight in the arena to provide entertainment, often fighting terrified prisoners of war who are allowed, at most, light armor and a machete, and most often, even less than that. While sometimes slaves are used to fight in the arena, the Legion takes pride in having ranked and high-profile prisoners of war square off. Legionaries can test their mettle in gladiatorial combat for fame, although it is unknown if there are many such arenas throughout the Empire or just the one that is set up with the main fighting force. The Legion has strict rules regarding the roles and place of women in society. There is a reason that one never sees female legionaries, because men are said to be fighters while the women are caretakers and breeders, the latter of which is an imperative task to grow the ever-expanding Legion, and therefore it is thought that they would be wasted as fighters or laborers. However, this isn't a noble belief, since women are property and almost used as a form of currency amongst legionaries, being traded, bought at will, and even given as rewards. One slave even thought that the women in the Legion had it worse off than the slaves. And another slave remarks that female slaves too young or too old will generally be left alone by the Legion. How comforting. Tribal males that are forced into the Legion have to fight or be killed, and male settlers within the Empire are allowed to be laborers or merchants. Males also have a child quota that they are obligated to fulfill to boost the Legion's population, although this can seemingly be pushed off onto their slaves who will fill this quota for them. The ban against women fighting extends to those even not strictly of the Legion, as the courier, should they be female, will not be allowed to fight in the arena under any circumstances, with Otho, the arena keeper, being savagely dismissive of the female courier. This isn't a simple belief in men's and women's place in society. There is a strong undercurrent of misogyny, since, as many people will attest to, rank and file legionaries consider women as breeding stock. Indeed, simply contrasting the way that the courier is spoken to by legionaries while male versus while female reveals extreme dismissiveness, insults, and unwarranted aggression. One female slave will even tell a female courier that she has heard legionaries looking at the courier and saying they want to try us out. It is said by some that Caesar teaches that women are beneath notice, but this may not apply to a small group of women designated as priestesses. It is only known that they will raise the children of slaves to be brought up in the ways of the legion so that they may be a weapon, a laborer, or a breeder for his war machine. Children are indoctrinated from birth to fulfill the role the legion has designated for them based on their sex. Boys start their training early in life. By their preteen years, they are wearing small legion uniforms and are even brought to the front lines as part of their training. Legate Lanius, the blood-soaked leader of Caesar's army, was made a full legionary by the time he was 12, meaning that not only are these boys training to kill, but they are being put into battle as child soldiers. It does not seem that the traditional family structure exists within the legion at all. Child quotas, women with no say or use other than bearing children, the early indoctrination and training of children to grow up to fight or work for the legion, and nary a mention of mom, dad, brothers, or sisters. In the legion, Caesar is all. There's another societal stance that is interesting because of how conflicting the information seems to be. Homosexuality is considered a capital punishment despite ancient Rome's generally more tolerant views towards it. There could be several reasons for this. Caesar's emphasis on the collective good over any one person, except himself of course, could have led to this decision in order to keep some of the legionaries from forming strong attachments to each other. It is also possible that it is an attempt to try and increase the birth rate, although it's debatable that such a decree would even have this intended effect. There is also the possibility that it is a personal stance of Caesar himself, but whatever the cause or causes may be, one thing is for sure: it does not stop his soldiers from engaging in it. While rumors are replete throughout the NCR and the Brotherhood of Steel that Legion soldiers regularly engage with one another, that could be chalked up to propaganda. However, it is confirmed from one former slave that even high-ranking members of the Legion will discreetly have homosexual relationships, and that same slave confirms that while not officially tolerated and potentially punished by death, that such relationships are not uncommon amongst the Legion, and are likely what fuels the rumors of the rest of the wasteland that the Legion, despite their official stance, can actually be pretty gay. Ghouls and super mutants are among the types of beings that face regular aggression and discrimination from humans, but interestingly, there does not seem to be quite the same level of vitriol within Legion lands. One potential ghoul companion named Raoul traveled through Caesar's Arizona holdings and apparently didn't run into many issues, but Caesar does not pay them much mind because ghouls and super mutants make up such a small proportion of the total population. There may be no official stance, but the average waster would likely still have bigoted views towards super mutants and ghouls. As should be expected, punishment within the Legion territories is meted out quickly, harshly, and fatally. The most practiced punishment is visceral and unique to the Legion, that being crucifixion. This method of execution has one strung up across a horizontal beam, arms outstretched to hang until a slow death due to asphyxiation or exposure to the harsh wasteland conditions. This method is particularly effective as a visual warning to everyone else to follow the laws and commands of the Legion, and has been used against cam runners, tribes that try to resist assimilation, prisoners of war, and those considered degenerates, which is basically everyone that's not Legion. This type of punishment would be meted out to anyone within Legion lands who is found with drugs or alcohol, not just runners or dealers. The Legion also resorts to beheadings, quick and easy, but will reserve special kinds of executions to instill terror in their adversaries. Such methods include being hacked to bits by a machete, burned alive, ripped apart by Legion war dogs, thrown off cliffs, and even covered in pitch, then lit on fire, and then thrown off a cliff in this 3-for-1 special reserved for the most disgraceful. Failing militarily can have dire consequences, as the legate can order a decimation where 1/10 of the offending unit soldiers are beaten to death by the remaining 9/10. Rumors of such things have spread as far as New Vegas, where Mr. New Vegas will report on this exact thing on the radio. Although Caesar isn't a true believer, the official religion of the Legion is the cult of Mars, which focuses veneration towards Caesar, who claimed himself the son of Mars early on in the Legion's formation. The doctrine states that Caesar, as the son of Mars, had nearly every aspect of the Legion dictated and passed on to him from Mars himself. The Legion's mission and goal to break and assimilate the people of the wasteland in order to create a stable empire that can survive and thrive in the post-apocalyptic world is considered to be a purpose and mission given by Mars. Not much else is known about the rituals of the religion, with Legate Lanius appearing to be one of the few true believers, often speaking of Mars watching and admonishing his soldiers not to disappoint their god. Human sacrifice is apparently allowed, although we don't know the precise rules around it. The only time it is observed is in Legate Lanius' war tent just before the attack on Hoover Dam. Lanius has sacrificed several slaves and captured NCR soldiers to Mars in the hopes that he will get the official order to unleash his forces on the NCR. No other Roman gods are mentioned, so it isn't clear how much of the original Roman religion exists within the Legion's religious framework, and it's possible it only focuses on Mars, possibly turning the Roman polytheistic religion into a nearly monotheistic one. This would have interesting implications because there would be some noticeable parallels with Christianity, with Jesus being the son of the one true God. Speaking with any member of the Legion will make one thing clear: they have a manner of speech and pronunciation that is unique to them and not heard of anywhere else in the American wasteland. This is not some sort of tribal artifact or evolution of a pre-war accent or language. It is a very deliberate choice that is mandated by Caesar, of course. The Legion speaks English but emphasizes true Latin pronunciation, and pure Latin is oft spoken in phrases by many in the Legion, particularly those of higher rank, and Caesar himself likes to show off by throwing in Latin words and phrases during normal speech. It is at the point where one can tell how another stands or regards Caesar and the Legion just by how they pronounce Caesar's or Caesar's name. This seems to simply be another way to give the Legion an identity distinct from everyone else in the wasteland, and has given rise to one of the Legionaries' favorite words: profligate. Originating from Latin, of course, it means one lacking in morals and engaged in morally dubious behavior, and is the word de jure for all those outside of the Legion. The Legion itself has a very distinct way of dress. However, this seems to only apply to Caesar and his military. Normal settlers that live within Legion territories seem to dress no differently from the wasters of the NCR. Legionary armor seems to emulate the Lorica Hamada in shape and is worn over a red tunic. Various ranks like Centurions have helmet crests, which is a faithful copy of historical Centurion armor meant to make them stand out on the battlefield for their soldiers to follow. Unique armor is only for the highest ranks, like Legate Lanius, who wears heavy metal armor and a helmet in a unique style, complete with a large cape. The full face mask is not common amongst the Legion and may follow the tradition of Roman cavalry masks, although it is very uniquely designed. The stark contrast in clothing from the Legion to settlers within Legion territories is a great example of the dichotomy between the spheres of the military and the civilians. The Legion's economy is a full-blown war economy. That is to say that production is geared in a way to prioritize support for the army. Due to the Legion's stance on chems and technology, industries within Legion territories would look different from the NCR. That said, the Legion makes for honest trading partners, so long as one doesn't try to sell alcohol or chems. They will deal fairly with traders and merchants. This, coupled with the fact that the Legion doesn't demand taxes from merchants, and the territories being so safe that merchants don't need to spend money to hire guards, means that it is much easier and more profitable to trade within Legion-held areas. The Legion does demand tribute from the settlements in its control to finance ongoing war efforts, but does not levy taxes in the same way the NCR does or the pre-war governments did either. However, the Legion does not penalize traders within its holdings that do business with the NCR despite them being at war with each other, likely banking on the fact that only those willing to pay taxes and brave the more dangerous NCR wastes are hard to come by. Individuals that are specifically marked as enemies, like the courier could be, will not be able to trade with settlers from Legion territories. Whether this is an official rule or just possibly people playing it safe and not risking being crucified for a little business is unclear, but the effect is the same. Like any real power, the Legion mints and uses its own bespoke currency. However, the Legion denarius and aureus coins are unique when compared to other nearby currencies. Bottle caps, the most widespread form of currency, is backed by water and has been for over 100 years to the start of Fallout New Vegas. The NCR dollar used to be backed by gold until its gold reserves were largely destroyed or taken during the NCR Brotherhood of Steel War. As it stands, it is a fiat currency backed by the trust and confidence in the NCR government, which has been diminishing as of late in the face of the Legion menace. Legion coins, however, are made from precious metals. A denarius is made of silver and is the lesser of the coins. The front is emblazoned with the profile of a young Caesar and his name, and on the reverse are the 3 men that years ago were taken captive by the Blackfoots, thereby starting the Legion. The aureus is 25 times more valuable than the denarius. It's made of gold and it has an older Caesar with a laurel wreath which signifies victory. Written are the words that translate to eternity of rule and peace through war, once again affirming Caesar's ultimate authority and the Legion's non-stop wars of expansion. It is interesting to note that the Legion's currency is the strongest of the 3 encountered in Fallout New Vegas, and it is one of the easiest to trade with because the coin's value is inherent to the metals that they're made of. That said, the Legion can and will pay in non-Legion currencies, as seen when an NCR citizen was sold into slavery, and the seller was paid in bottle caps. It appears that the Legion economy differs from the NCR, with no large wealthy businesses or barons, and this could be by design to curb corruption. It may also be due to Caesar emphasizing military conquest over society building, and he may be counting on absorbing the massive civilian infrastructure and industries that have been built up over decades within the NCR. The sole focus of Caesar is not economics, statecraft, or diplomacy, but the building up of his indoctrinated slave army. His military is the second most defining feature of the Legion, just behind the Roman inspiration and aesthetic, and merits its own discussion. It is no surprise that Caesar patterned his army after the Romans, in particular the period called the post-Marian Reform. That said, the ground tactics, namely organizing waves of legionaries by their seniority, comes from an earlier time. Caesar is atop the hierarchy to whom everybody obeys, but his position is as a political leader and not as a military one, although he could do so if he wished. The second in command to Caesar is his legate, who assumes command and control of the military under the auspices of Caesar. Centurions are chosen from veteran legionaries and command groups of 80 men, and decani lead squads of 8 legionaries, reporting to centurions. Rank is correlated with bravery and skill in battle, with the newest and least proven legionaries being on the front meat grinder with meager weapons, followed by prime legionaries and veterans who bring up the rear with the most experience, the best armor, and sophisticated weapons. Much of the armor seen used by legionaries appear to be adapted pre-war American football pads and gear, although higher ranks will see armor meant for combat, with some designs even incorporating parts of power armor, although actual working power armor is never seen amongst the Legion due to their stance on technology. Basic legionaries will often use spears or machetes, sometimes weaker firearms and light armor, making up for these deficiencies with fanatic loyalty and bloodthirst. They are, however, allowed to pick up a fallen enemy's weapon if they so choose, which has led to a policy of fatally wounded NCR soldiers destroying their weapons before a legionary can recover them. Prime legionaries have better armor, although it looks the same as recruits, and are generally provided with firearms like hunting rifles, and veteran legionaries have more armor and access to heavier weaponry, up to and including 50 caliber weaponry like the 12.7mm submachine gun. While the legionaries make up the brunt of the Legion's capabilities, it doesn't account for all of it. The Legion relies on a wide network of adept scouts, called explorers, who carry minimal weaponry since their main purpose is to gather and relay information, which they do with impressive capability. Another secretive group are assassins, who are meant to target those marked for death by Caesar himself. They will track and ambush their target even in the most remote parts of the Mojave, and they travel in groups, heavily armed. These assassins can be regularly encountered if the courier decides to help the NCR or Robert House over the Legion and actively fight against them. One hand-picked group of fighters have a less direct way to fight against the enemies of Caesar through subterfuge, espionage, and sabotage. Led by the creepy Vulpes and Colta, they are usually sent ahead of active fronts to lay the groundwork and to sow discord, hoping to make ground assaults more successful. Successful operations are replete in the Mojave. Frumentari were responsible for secretly releasing intense pre-war radioactive material right within an NCR camp at Searchlight, killing and ghoulifying nearly everyone and knocking the camp offline. This allowed for the Legion to take the nearby Cottonwood Cove, one of their few holdings on the west side of the Colorado. Vulpes and Colta and his Frumentari are usually first encountered in the former town of Nipton, where they were able to use the Nipton mayor's greed against him and the rest of the town by deliberately having powder gangers and NCR soldiers meet at Nipton, causing the two groups to begin fighting. When the Frumentari swooped in, killing many, taking the rest prisoner, and instituting a lottery system whereby only one prisoner would be able to leave without injury. The rest were beaten, attacked by dogs, crucified, burned, or enslaved, officially sacking the town and leaving it desolate. Vulpes will leave his Legion armor behind to disguise himself as a normal waster and infiltrate the strip, where the Frumentari are secretly making deals with one of the families on the strip called the White Gloves, and supporting another family, the Omertas, in their aspirations of attacking the strip and wresting New Vegas from House's grip. The Frumentari are also the ones to plan and orchestrate an assassination attempt on the NCR president, Aaron Kimball, during a planned morale-boosting trip to Hoover Dam. They have a network of spies amongst the NCR, with one prolific infiltrator working up the NCR ranks and relaying troop movements and other sensitive data to the Legion over the radio. They regularly dress as couriers to blend in and have a network of supply caches and are constantly working to convince groups and factions in the wasteland to ally with them, like the Great Khans. The last elite group that stands separate from the Legion is yet another hand-picked group, although this is the smallest one to speak of yet. Centurion-level legionaries are invited to be among a group called the Praetorian, and to do so they must challenge an existing Praetorian to an unarmed duel to the death. Killing the Praetorian is the only way to assume their position and become one of Caesar's elite guards. This guard has a very specific mission: protect Caesar at all costs. They are unique in that they only used unarmed weaponry, particularly ballistic fists, which are an extremely formidable weapon in close quarters hand-to-hand combat. They are faster than most other Legion fighters, with increased damage resistance as well, and are found just outside and inside Caesar's tent, ready to end anyone that would do him harm. Rarely they will assist assassins on their missions, and the only other time they're not seen around Caesar is during the final battle in Legate Lanius' tent, right before the attack on Hoover Dam. For some reason, they all wear the same sunglasses and are nearly universally sporting mohawks, although there are some exceptions. Uncommonly, one will see a rank called Vexillarius. They stand out due to their armor with metal plates on the front, and most importantly, they carry the standard of the bull elevated on their backs. Carrying the standard into battle is what gives them their special rank and mission, as a Vexillarius is seen as boosting morale of the surrounding legionaries. They are exceptionally skilled though, opting for heavier weaponry and have high health and damage resistance. The average legionnaire, even the recruits, are more motivated and in many cases more skilled in battle than NCR soldiers, although they have a particular weakness of being trained and indoctrinated to not think for themselves and to follow orders rapidly and unceasingly until ordered otherwise. This means any breakdown in the chain of command can cause much greater disruption in the Legion's fighting ability than the NCR, and is a key reason why the Legion lost the first battle of Hoover Dam. It's notable that many Legion armors have prominent red X's on them, like the Centurion's pauldron, similar to what we see on slaves. Perhaps it's used as a mark of ownership. Anyone with an X is owned, for lack of a better term, by Caesar. The Legion has bolstered its forces in the wake of their defeat at the First Battle of Hoover Dam. They got a new legate who is fierce beyond measure and holds almost a mythic place in the minds of his soldiers. And the secretive Frumentari have stuck their tendrils into the NCR, sapping its strength and bleeding away sensitive information. The Legion by all appearances seems ready to overwhelm the NCR, cross the Rubicon, so to speak, and claim the shining jewel of the Mojave for Caesar, where he can finally have his Rome. To ensure victory this time though, Caesar is being a bit more cautious, and should the courier choose to join forces with the Legion, they will be given a special mark that is proof of Caesar's favor. While technically not a part of the Legion, the courier is asked to do a number of things to guarantee a Legion victory, making allies with some independent factions like the Boomers, who have access to heavy firepower, and the Khans, thereby making them a potential tool in the fight ahead. Disruptions on the strip that would make it harder for the NCR and impair Robert House's own machinations for power are also sought after, like giving the Omertas, who run the Gomorrah Casino, grand aspirations to storm the New Vegas Strip, or secretly allying with the White Glove Society, some of whom wish to return to their practice of cannibalism but are forbidden by House's rules. Infiltrating House's casino, the Lucky 38, and killing him, as well as gaining access to House's bunker where hundreds of his robots are lying dormant, is seen as necessary to neutralize the threat that House poses, as does destroying the bunker for the Brotherhood of Steel, who are in hiding and who Caesar deems a threat. Lastly, successfully assassinating the NCR president will all but guarantee complete and utter chaos in the NCR and be a blow to morale, all of which just strengthens Caesar's position. However, there is the complication of his brain tumor and worsening condition. It is clear to him that he must have the tumor operated on if he is to survive, which is something that the courier can help facilitate, either doing it themselves, if they're skilled enough, or by finding someone or something that can do it instead. Based on the end slides in a Legion victory, should Caesar survive his tumor procedure, he will take the entire map area, driving the NCR forces to the Mojave outpost, one of the most southernmost points on the map. The Legion enslaves much of the population and peacefully rules over the rest. If Caesar dies though, Legate Lanius will become the leader of the Legion, and rather than seeing New Vegas as his new Rome, he enters the city, utterly destroying anyone who dares resist him. In a more brutal manner, he occupies all locations and enslaves a huge portion of the population. The question remains though, can the Legion survive at any length without its creator, its mastermind, its dictator, its god? Most adversaries of the Legion, like Mr. House, have no doubts that the Legion could survive in its current state without Caesar for a period of time. Whether that would take weeks, months, or years, the Legion would eventually have to adapt or fall apart. If Caesar himself even suspects this is a possibility, he will eagerly seek out a cure to keep such a thing from happening. If Caesar is as smart as he thinks he is, then he will begin planning a viable pathway of succession so that the Pax Romana that he envisions for the wasteland will be a possibility. Legate Lanius is the natural second in command and will become the new leader in the event Caesar dies, but he is a military leader, not a political one. Caesar admits himself that his legate has no love for the Legion or its legionaries. His only loyalty is to Caesar. Lanius sees the Legion as a tool to defeat his enemies, which conveniently means Caesar's enemies. Caesar's warriors fear Lanius more than they do the NCR, and he's hoping this fear will drive the Legion to victory at the dam. The Legion is a fearsome and potent military force, but that's all it is. Caesar recognizes this weakness in his ultimate plan, but Lanius doesn't seem to either realize this or he doesn't care, as he is a single-minded killing machine, and his lack of forethought or planning outside of battle won't ever see the Legion achieve Pax Romana that Caesar waxes poetic about. There are lots of unknowns should Lanius come to power, so we can't be sure, but neither are the settlers within the Legion. The merchant at the fort, Dale, isn't sure if he will be allowed to even come and trade at the fort any longer if Lanius is in charge. There simply is no precedent for not having Caesar. This is all speculation, although it is based on evidence from the game, and it has been debated ad nauseum what the canonical ending of Fallout New Vegas will be. Did Caesar conquer his antithesis and finally make his true empire? Did he die and Legate Lanius broke the NCR at the point of his sword? Or did the NCR yet again defeat the Legion? Perhaps Robert House was able to humiliate both massive powers and have New Vegas stand under no other thumb than his own. Well, we have glimpses and the barest of snippets from the second season of the Fallout TV show, and it shows us a few things. The Legion absolutely exists nearly 15 years after the events of Fallout New Vegas. They appear to be close to Vegas or within the area, since Lucy, who we know is going to New Vegas, ends up as a prisoner of the Legion, and Caesar is certainly no longer in charge, based on this bit where we see a Legion man with the laurel leaf crown, just as Caesar is shown to have on the currency. This isn't Caesar though, since the figure is wearing what appears to be legate armor, so it appears as though Caesar has indeed died, and the Legion exists in some form, so we will absolutely have to see what ends up happening, and I will be making an updated video to address what we know of the state of the Legion after the final episode airs. It is worth pointing out that underneath the Roman clothing, the Latin pronunciation, and the emulation of parts of the Roman Empire, Caesar did not introduce real Roman culture. Caesar has created a slave army, of which he is the dictator, with barely any culture, and absolutely no civilian infrastructure. He has actually not introduced real culture, and anyone that has knowledge to expose this truth, that Caesar has ripped off a 2,000-year-old empire rather than being the actual son of Mars, building the Legion in a divinely inspired image, is a problem for Caesar. It's because of this that Caesar has a standing order to kill any followers of the apocalypse they may come across, since anyone with some knowledge of history would show where he got his revelations from, not from Mars, but from books. The order and stability Caesar was able to create at the expense of tribal cultures, languages, and of course human life, was it worth the sacrifice? Has it been worth the brutality, the dehumanization, the destruction of the traditional family, the suffering, and the instilling of fascist values? It is worth pointing out that the Legion were originally created and meant to be implemented in the unreleased Fallout 3 game by Black Isle, before the project was cancelled and the series was sold to Bethesda. There were interesting differences though, although much is the same. The Legion formed when 3 men, Joshua Graham, and 2 followers of the Apocalypse, helped unite many tribes together to fight against an enormous and terrifying raider group, the Twisted Hares. Does that name sound familiar? When they were successful, the tribal confederation was transformed into the Legion, adopting the Roman aesthetic. But the position of Caesar would be contested, and indeed, there would have been a number of Caesars since they are always at threat of being assassinated. They extract tribute from those that they conquer in the form of slaves, paying extra for super mutants, and stretch from Denver to the Hoover Dam, where they are fighting the NCR and were meant to lose their first battle for the structure. We can see then that much of what was originally intended for Fallout 3 came through in New Vegas, although some details were changed. Thank you for being here with me today. Tell me what you think of the Legion, both as an organization and what you think may have happened with the Legion after the events of New Vegas. Did they win? Did they lose and regroup? What role do you think they will play in Season 2? I will do a follow-up to this topic after Season 2 has aired, and it will be fun to see what we get right and what we get less right. If you enjoy my videos and like what I do, then support in whatever way you like. And if you want to join Adam's Holy Army, a real army, not those Legion LARPers like these faithful folks here, you can do so on Patreon or YouTube. I would like to extend a special welcome to newcomers, Cherry on Patreon, and oh boy, we got quite the list here. Stanislaw Solstiak, Ryan Ellen, Soro, oh my gosh, I'm doing such an awful job. SP Ace Cowboy, Andrew Staley, Brendan Relum, Oh Canada, Samus, Emperor Griffin, Victoria Michelle Remus, Neum, Craig Lawless, David Ragsdale, Squid Forest, Mo, Abyss, Max S, Sturbon, Nathan Payne, Aquatic Illusion, Yakutat, Nigel Personal Information. Why is that so funny? Gengar Rides, Stefan Hunman, Isaac Worm, Low Key Johnny, Ethan Wiley, Video Game Elevator Tours with Jacob. Wow, that sounds kind of interesting. Jamie, Distracted DB, Hot and Spicy Weiss, or Vice, I don't know. Sir Matchsticks, King Cut Nut, Loud OG, Leffel Mac, Stephen Hershey, Levi Anderson, Beam, Matthew, Theotisk, Rudy Kroon, Andrew Huntsman, Captain the Drek, Enno Hellman, Gerard Kurriger, Sean Clark, Detective Lime, Crab God, Charles Fail, D Cross, and Justin 34. Whew. Adams certainly has been generous. As always, a special shout out to the top tier supporters, Acker B, Gardner Minshew Simp, who by the way might be my longest top supporter of all time, Darkle, Tapey Papey, The Breadman, Tyler Eaton, Owen Balzer, and 94, The Love Mummy, Shallowfire 13, Phantom Mink, Tatoranus, Ibis the Owl, Justin 34, Cherry, Leffelmac, and Mo. Just Mo. Adam is pleased. Take care of yourselves. Adam has great plans for you. Walk in his holy glow, and I will see you soon.